She gripped her twins' hands tightly, hearts pounding, as they climbed aboard the plane. It was going to be a routine family outing, just the three of them in the middle of a typical day. Then, suddenly, a stranger's eyes grew cold. A voice called out, and everything shifted in a blink. What began as a normal flight turned into a fight for judgment and fear, a confrontation that would rock everyone on that plane and expose a reality most choose to deny. How far would one go to protect what is right, when the world appears set to close its eyes and ignore it? It was a sunny, bustling morning at the airport. Maya's hands were full, holding her identical twin girls, their small suitcases bumping along beside them. Travel was never quite organized, but she loved these moments. The laughter shared. The tiny triumphs of getting all of them from point A to point B without a tantrum. For Maya, this vacation was merely another chapter in her routine. Work, family, the perpetual beat of life that never seemed to slow down. She pushed through the group with ease, her eyes searching for their gate, greeting passing strangers with a smile, oblivious to the growing tension surrounding her. Bodies rushed past, suitcases rolling on the slick floor, announcements ringing out in the terminal. It was normal, routine, secure. That security, however, was tenuous, a gossamer veil over an existence where people continued to judge, to divide, to draw lines where there shouldn't be. When she walked up to the boarding zone, a man sitting across the aisle made his purpose clear without a word. A glance, swift and uninviting, halted her. Something in his face was louder than any announcement. This would not be an ordinary flight. The instant drew out, weighty with unvoiced understanding. Maya's heartbeat accelerated, a cramp congealing in her belly, because she felt what was about to happen, even though she could not yet identify it. In that instant, a routine flight transformed into a test, not just of patience or nerves, but of courage, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to face injustice head-on. And what happened next would shock everyone on board, leaving a story that no one could ignore. Maya led her twins down the aisle, their little hands around hers as she hunted for their seats. The plane vibrated with the low whine of settling passengers, flight attendants hurrying by with practiced swiftness. She experienced the usual reassurance of a journey begun, or so she believed. As she reached her row, a man sitting nearby shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing. The glare was sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. "Excuse me," he muttered, voice low but firm. "I'd rather not sit next to them." He gestured vaguely toward the twins, his words dripping with unspoken disdain. Maya froze, her heartbeat suddenly loud in her ears. For a moment, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Parents shifted their kids, a flight attendant halted in mid-step, and in the distance, a baby started crying. Maya's thoughts whirled. Was she going to fight? Was she going to demand? But the man's eyes didn't blink, and a mute, crushing silence fell over the row. She sensed her twins tense up, feeling her tension, and quietly burned anger within her. How does one look at innocent children and not see humanity? The flight attendant came over, gracious but guarded, obviously cognizant of the precarious balance she had to walk. Words were spoken, apologies made, diplomatic evasions provided, but nothing appeared to appease the man. His obstinacy was not merely a nuisance, it was a judgment, a refusal to acknowledge Maya and her children as equals. The whispers of other flyers grew more insistent, curiosity and unease mingling in the stale air of the cabin. Maya clenched her teeth, attempting to calm her tone as she said, "They're just kids. They've done nothing to you." But the man shook his head, leaning away as if his denial was a matter of principle. Her anger threatened to overflow. She felt the air around her, the flight's normal cadence, the whizzing luggage, the announcements, the rumble of the engines, all become foreign, remote. All came down to this moment of injustice, of one attempting to exert power where there was none to exert. Minutes crawled like hours. The twins grasped her, hushed questions she had no time to respond to. Then, abruptly, came a tap on the cockpit door, sharp as a warning. The pilot stood there, unruffled but authoritative, eyes running over the strained line. The cabin held its breath once more. What would come next? Would one voice of authority shatter the choking hold of prejudice? Passengers leaned forward, straining to glimpse, whispering to each other. Maya's heart thudded, hope and fear blending. This routine flight had become a test of morality, of courage, of judgment. And in the following instant, a choice would be made that no one on this plane would ever forget. One that would reveal the naked, unvarnished truth about what others are willing to suffer, and what it truly takes to do what's right. The cabin was quiet, all eyes on the aisle where Maya stood, twins cradled in her arms. The man's refusal hadn't mellowed. If anything, his glare had intensified, as if defying anyone to defy him. Maya was overwhelmed by a rush of fatigue, irritation, and righteously indignant fury battling in her breast. For an instant, she was trapped, not only by the window of an aisle and rows of seats, but by the society that permitted such moments to take place with near callousness. Then the pilot's voice broke through the tension, firm, steady, but firm. "Sir, I require you to cooperate." The man tensed, and a silence fell over the cabin. Maya's pulse began to race. This was it, the instant where fear, valor, and justice met in one breath. Would he obey, or would the situation blow up before everyone's eyes? The pilot's word was law. The man protested, voice growing hoarse with anger, but the flight staff stood solid, placing themselves where they could be seen. Maya's twins hid their faces in her shoulder, small bodies shaking, and for an instant, the burden of powerlessness threatened to overwhelm her. She clamped her teeth hard together, whispering reassurances she did not feel, hoping that rationality would overcome bias. Then, something broke. The man's obstinate refusal weakened under the unyielding authority in front of him. He lastly shifted, grumbling, mumbling to himself, but finally giving way. The cabin sighed as if collectively releasing a held breath. Relief flooded Maya in a wave, but it was tinged with still smoldering anger, incredulity, and the bitter realization that such moments were far too frequent. As the plane flew higher, Maya wrapped her twins closer to her, their little hands holding onto hers with fresh trust. She knew, with a heavy, sure conviction, that this flight was more than a trip across the clouds. It had become a test of strength, an encounter with the raw, unvarnished truth of prejudice. And even though the worst was behind, one thing hung over the cabin like the engine's hum. How many times would there be injustice that would go unpunished until someone stood up at last? The plane flew on, engines purring steadily, but the tension that had wrapped itself around the cabin persisted as a shadow. Maya cradled her twins in her arms, their tiny breaths against her chest, and at last let out a held breath. The battle was won, but its weight still lingered. There was relief mixed with a profound, unshakable knowledge. The world beyond this airplane didn't always stop, didn't always step in, and didn't always see the quiet bravery it takes to challenge prejudice. And around her, other passengers murmured among themselves, eyes lingering on her and on her daughters. Some nodded in solidarity, tiny acts of recognition that let Maya know she wasn't unseen, that not all people turn their faces from injustice. But the harsh reality of what had happened, the naked, unadorned prejudice she had encountered, was a harsh reminder of how easily mundane life can be shattered by prejudice and fear. As she looked out the window at clouds flowing like tattered shields, Maya considered the myriad unseen struggles waged each day. Children, parents, strangers, facing a world that too often condemns before perceiving. This flight, as short as it was more than a trip. It was an echo of society itself. Bravery, dignity, and compassion were weighed in that cramped aisle, and for one moment, they had won. But the question hung there, heavier than the aircraft itself. How many times must children and families like hers experience such fear and injustice without the world intervening? How long will silence and complacency enable prejudice to flourish? Maya was aware that she couldn't do it all, but she could tell her tale, hug her girls tight, and hold her ground whenever something seemed unjust. And perhaps, just perhaps, every voice that was heard, every story that was shared, could inch the world a little bit further toward justice. Because one flight, one moment of courage, reminds us all of a very simple thing. Being a hero for what is right isn't always brave. It's required.